is the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, unless, of course, you're Derek Carr. Now, the Raiders last season, they finished at 6-11. They could put up points. They had more points than the Los Angeles Chargers. They scored 395. Unfortunately, they gave up the second most in the AFC, and that's 418, which kind of resulted in that negative 23 points for and against differential. Passing offense, good. 6th in the league, 269.4 per game. Run offense, not too bad. 17th in the league, 121.1 rushing yards per game. Passing defense, run defense, not so good. That defense in the pass game, 29th in the league, allowing 242.9 yards per contest, while the run defense was 19th, allowing 122.8. Now, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about the Vegas Raiders in 2022, they weren't able to win the close games like they had done in 2021. The Raiders in 2021 were 7-2 in one-score contests. Meanwhile, in 2022, they lost 9 of 13 such contests. Vegas has had plenty of time to reflect on a season that included benching their all-time leading passer, their Pro Bowl signal caller for the final 2 games of the season. They had one of the more formidable offenses, even when Jared Stidham took snaps under center, as they were 6th in the AFC in scoring. Unfortunately, Derek Carr couldn't play defense, a defense that allowed more points than just about every team in the league. And I feel that when we look back on this whole campaign, Derek Carr, and this is true about most quarterbacks, you get too much credit when things are going good, you get too much blame when things are going bad. And I think that's kind of the situation that happened with the Raiders, not only in 2022, but 2021, 2020, 2019. You got to get your drift when we're talking about Derek Carr. Now, the camp battle that I'm watching here heading into 2023, all eyes are going to be on the quarterback position, and rightfully so. Jimmy Garoppolo, he should be the starter when he's healthy, if he's healthy. I'm not even sure he's going to get healthy, which is really making the whole Derek Carr release a bad look for the Raiders organization heading into 2023. Now, I will give the Raiders the benefit of the doubt here, assuming that they've been aware of Garoppolo's foot problem since the get-go, since day number 1, and they're comfortable with Garoppolo's recovery, and he's going to be ready for week number 1 because Aiden O'Connell isn't going to be ready. Brian Hoyer simply isn't that dude anymore, and if your eyes aren't on that quarterback position, it's got to be on the guys who are catching the passes from the quarterback, namely Jacoby Myers versus Hunter Renfrow, battling it out for slot supremacy. Renfrow has been the topic of trade talks here much of the offseason, and I'm not sure either pass catcher is really built to play on the outside. So when it comes down to the one who's going to have the most success is going to be this receiver here who's playing out of the slot. Now, when you look at this draft class for the Raiders haven't been good or haven't had much luck when it comes to the draft in recent years. In fact, most of their draft picks outside of Josh Jacobs have either moved on, been cut, been released, been traded, just not been in Vegas. So that's called the way it is. Now, the first round selection there of Tyree Wilson was a huge addition there because you're getting yourself one of the premier pass rushers that was available in this year's draft. In the second round, pick number 35, Michael Mayer, tight end out of Notre Dame. Third round, they went back to the defensive line there with Byron Young there out of Alabama. Fourth round, Yokarian Bennett, a Maryland cornerback. Fourth round, Aiden O'Connell, Purdue quarterback. Fifth round, they went back to the secondary and grabbed themselves Christopher Smith out of Georgia. And in the sixth round, they got themselves a good coverage linebacker there in Amari Burney out of Florida. Now, when I look at this draft class, the Raiders have identified that they really need help on the defensive side of the ball. Again, Wilson, Young, Bennett, Christopher Smith, Burney, all guys that are there to help identify the misfortunes of this defense moving forward. Now, when you look at the additions and subtractions via the offseason here, Jimmy Garoppolo, he comes to mind first. Jacoby Myers, Marcus Epps, the safety, cornerback Brandon Faison, linebacker Robert Spillane, tight ends Austin Hooper and O.J. Howard, cornerback Duke Shelley, wide receiver Philip Dorsett, and again, cornerback David Long Jr. Again, with one eye on their defense, they addressed a lot of things here where they needed help. Secondary help, Marcus Epps, Brendan Faison, right? Robert Spillane, who's probably going to step in and be a starting linebacker day 1. And that's not saying a whole lot because this linebacker core may be one of the worst in the league right now. Their losses, Derek Carr, I mean, it's definitely one of the biggest losses when you think about it. Foster Moreau, tight end, linebacker Denzel Perryman, who had a really good couple seasons there with the Raiders, tight end Darren Waller, and of course, wide receiver Matt Collins. Now, what was the best move for the Raiders this offseason? I'm actually going to go with one that may be a bit of a shock to most people. And I'm going to say the trade of Darren Waller, which freed up some much needed salary space, but that's only a good move because of how Michael Mayer basically fell right into their laps. If Mayer doesn't come to Vegas, if they don't draft Mayer with the 35th pick, this is probably not a good move for the Raiders. Waller has been a great player for this organization and for fantasy when he's been healthy. Unfortunately, your best ability is your availability, and Waller simply wasn't available last season. Unfortunately, the NFL is a business, and when you land a big-time extension, the team expects more than 9 games out of you and 28 receptions, and that's the ugly truth there. I'll say it. Now, the worst move for the Raiders, I think it's pretty obvious. I get that Derek Carr was a polarizing fixture within the organization, within the fan base, within fantasy. I also understand he never got to the big one, right? Playoff success always eluded him. And that's what we are really based on as NFL players is success in the postseason. This whole situation, though, feels like management botched it. I'm not even going to pretend that I'm not a big Derek Carr fan at this point because, hey, I love what Derek Carr did for this organization. And I think he's still a very good quarterback. I also don't believe there's 15 other quarterbacks better than Derek Carr in the league right now. But that's for another video, another day. But making a move of this magnitude without a plan really doesn't feel right. Garoppolo, he's a lateral move at best. I can't imagine him being their first option in the offseason. If you're going to lose your number one quarterback, you need to make sure you're getting a number one quarterback. It's really that simple. As good as Tyree Wilson may be for this organization, I think he's going to be fantastic. You had to have considered strongly to move that 7th overall pick and try and get yourself positioned ahead of the Colts to acquire Anthony Richardson. I mean, I think that's what the fan base wants. I think that's what fantasy football wanted, was Anthony Richardson in a Raiders uniform. Now, what needs to happen for these Raiders here in 2023? The Raiders need Jimmy Garoppolo to be ready for week number 1, not Aiden O'Connell, and sure as heck not Carson Wentz. Now, Garoppolo, he's coming in from San Francisco, where he played with George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and for a brief period, Christian McCaffrey. So Garoppolo, he knows one thing, and that's how to get the ball into his playmakers' hands. Josh Jacobs, he needs to be that bell cow once again because there's no one behind him. He's going to be carrying this load. And Devontae Adams, he has to be a top 5 wide receiver. Not just a top 5 wide receiver in the league, but in fantasy as well. As the Raiders, they need to find a way to make it work between Renfrow and Myers. And that's probably easier said than done. That's only part of the equation. We're only talking about the offensive side of the ball. Someone other than Max Crosby needs to find a way to get pressure on opposing quarterbacks. Chandler Jones was second on the team in sacks with 4.5 last season. So what's the outlook look like for the Raiders here in 2023? I'm not sure what to expect. I really don't. It really comes down to Jimmy Garoppolo and his availability. Vegas was a playoff team in 2021. The record dropped to 6-11 last season. But if you believe that Garoppolo is a lateral move from Derek Carr at the quarterback position, then if this defense can improve, and it should improve based on the moves that they made, they'll be in that 8-9 and 9-8 type record as far as wins and losses are concerned. And I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here once again. I'm going to call it 9-8, just because I think that this division is going to be really good. But I think that the Raiders are going to find a way to win those closer games compared to what they did last season. We know that they're going to be in close games, and I don't think the record quite indicated where they were last season. But again, this all depends on Jimmy Garoppolo playing and staying healthy. As far as fantasy is concerned, we have to talk about the top 5 fantasy assets for the Vegas Raiders, and it starts with number 1, Davante Adams. Adams is still a top 3 receiver in the game today. But for fantasy, he's a bit of an unknown. We don't know with any certainty what Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be able to play in 2023. The one thing that we do know is in week 17 and 18, without Derek Carr, Adams would haul in 12 of 20 targets for 226 yards and a pair of scores with Jared Stidham throwing the ball. Now, Stidham is still an upgrade over Aiden O'Connell, still an upgrade over Brian Hoyer, and I'm still wondering why the Raiders let Stidham go. Now, number 2, Josh Jacobs. Volume is king. Jacobs turned his league high 393 touches into 1,653 rushing yards and 400 yards receiving. Yes, we had a 2,000-yard man there in Vegas last season. Vegas, didn't do nothing to put a challenge on Jacobs in this backfield. So expect another bell kill type season in 2023. And number 3, Jakobi Meyers. Both Meyers and Renfrow, they both play primarily out of the slot. Meyers just got paid this season in free agency, and he's had plenty of success there in New England, especially 2021 under Josh McDaniels, who was the then offensive coordinator. And number 4, Jimmy Garoppolo. Garoppolo averaged 16.7 fantasy points last season in San Francisco before getting hurt in week 13. Garoppolo understands one thing, and that's how to get the ball into guys' hands that are going to make him look better. He was averaging 8.3 yards per attempt despite not having what you would consider a big arm. Unfortunately, again, we do not know the extent of the injury in which Garoppolo is dealing with because the Raiders have been pretty vague all offseason when it comes down. We don't even have a timetable for his return. And number 5, Hunter Renfrow. It's still not certain if Renfrow is going to be on this roster come week number 1. Vegas has invested more money into this receiver room than any other organization. Renfrow's cap hit is going to make him a difficult asset to move. Even if the Raiders do find a trade partner, they're going to be eating about $1.8 million in dead cap until 2026 if they moved Renfrow. So heading into your 2023 fantasy drafts, who's the one player from the Raiders that you have to add to your roster? It's Josh Jacobs, leading the league in touches, leading the league in rushing, and he was 3rd in PPR scoring behind Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler, and yet he's still being drafted far too late, far too often at the top of the 3rd round. Vegas did nothing this offseason that's going to affect Josh Jacobs, except maybe not pay him, but you should expect another heavy workload for Josh Jacobs looking to secure that big payday after being hit with the franchise tag in the offseason. Now, the biggest bust, hey, this one hurts. This one stings a little bit. With the uncertainty at the quarterback position, I'm going to go with Davante Adams here, who's being drafted as a 5th receiver off the board after finishing 3rd in fantasy circles a season ago. Adams turns 31 in December, but he's also coming off a season which he had a 32.3% target share. But that wasn't from passes from Jimmy Garoppolo. All the numbers say that Adams isn't slowing down, but last season, Waller and Renfrow, they each missed time, and the Raiders added Austin Hooper, Jakobi Meyers, and Michael Mayer. So through the process of elimination, there are more competition for targets this year than there was last season, just because Waller and Renfrow weren't playing. And then you're bringing both Renfrow is going to be there, Jakobi Meyers is going to be there, Austin Hooper is going to be there, Michael Mayer is going to be there. There's going to be more guys looking to catch passes. And we do know that one thing that Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't do is push the ball down the field very often. Now, the best fantasy value for this Raiders team is going to be Jakobi Meyers, who's currently coming off the board at pick 119 or wide receiver 54. That's right, behind Tyler Boyd, behind Odell Beckham Jr., behind Cortland Sutton, behind Michael Thomas, who can't stay healthy, behind Alan Lazard, behind Jameson Winston, who's suspended, and behind Juju Smith-Schuster, who replaced him in New England. Myers comes to Vegas with an understanding of this offense and what the coaches are expecting. So I'm expecting Myers to be a lot better than what he's currently being drafted at. As far as a fantasy sleeper is concerned, how about Michael Mayer? It's really an open competition for targets behind Davante Adams in this Raiders offense. And if we are assuming that Garoppolo will be available from start to finish, then we have to assume that Garoppolo's history is going to continue with him targeting tight ends, much like he did in San Francisco. I'm not saying Mayer is going to produce at a George Kittle type level, but he could be a nice tight end too that starts producing as a tight end type numbers there as the season progresses. Jimmy Garoppolo threw 15 touchdowns in his career to tight ends. He also has a 105.4 passer rating when targeting the position. So if you're targeting players for this Raiders team, there is some opportunity for fantasy production here from Michael Mayer, Davante Adams, Josh Jacobs, Jakobi Meyers, even possibly Hunter Renfrow, depending on how the situation plays out. The Raiders do have some fantasy value on the offensive side of the ball. And if their defense improves a little bit, they're still not going to be great, which means this offense is going to have to throw to stay into contests.